There was a time when silence seemed safer than the truth, a time when a single word could cost a life, and when staying silent seemed the only way to survive. But it was precisely in that silence that God was writing a plan. She was not a prophetess. She was not a priestess. She did not come from a powerful lineage. She was just a young Jewish woman in an empire that did not know her, and that was about to destroy her people. The Esther story. The Bible doesn't begin with a visible miracle. It begins with fear, with a hidden identity, with a question that echoes to this day. What if you were placed exactly where you are for a time like this? When Esther chose to speak, she risked not only the throne, she risked her own life to save an entire nation. And this isn't just a thrilling biblical story, it's a mirror, because perhaps today the silence you maintain is not protection, but a call awaiting courage. Before continuing, write in the comments, "For a time like this," and subscribe to the channel, because this story may change the way you understand faith, purpose, and courage. Now, let's go back to the beginning. There are times in life when speaking is dangerous, and silence seems to be the only intelligent option. Silence and biblical purpose walk hand in hand in the story of Esther in a way that challenges everything we think about courage. Because courage isn't always about shouting. Sometimes courage, it's about knowing when to wait, when to hide, when to let God act in silence, even if you don't yet understand the plan. Esther lived this in a radical way. She didn't choose to hide her Jewish identity out of shame. She hid it because revealing it meant certain death. In the Persian Empire, being different was dangerous. Being Jewish was even more dangerous. And Esther knew this from childhood. Raised by her cousin Mordecai, she learned early on that some truths need to be kept secret until God opens the door. But here's the mystery. God works in silence in ways our logic cannot grasp. While Esther, she lived anonymously, hidden away, unaware of the future, but the Lord was already moving invisible pieces. He already knew that this young orphan would one day stand before the most powerful king in the world. He already knew that her silence would be temporary, and that when the time came to speak, each word would be worth the lives of thousands. But for now, silence was the only armor she had. And perhaps you too are living through a time like that. A time of waiting, of hidden identity, of unanswered questions. But what if this silence isn't the absence of God, but rather preparation? Her name was Hadassah, but the world. I would know like Esther, which means star. Now ironic, isn't it? Because at that moment she was anything but brilliant in the eyes of the empire, orphaned at a young age, without father or mother, raised by Mordecai, her older cousin, who took her in as his own daughter. They lived in Susa, the capital of the Persian Empire, a place of gigantic palaces, unimaginable riches, and absolute power in the hands of one man, King Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes. An empire that stretched from India to Ethiopia, with 127 provinces under his command. But for Esther and the Jewish people, that empire was merely a gilded exile. They were far from Jerusalem, far from the temple, far from home. They lived among peoples who did not know the God of Israel, and in that context, revealing their Jewish identity was like lighting a flame in a powder keg. Imagine a scene. A young woman walks through the streets of Susa at dawn. The sun is still weak, the city awakening. She carries a water pitcher on her shoulders. Her eyes are deep but cautious. Every step is measured, every conversation calculated. She smiles when she needs to. Answer only what is necessary, because within her lies a secret that cannot be spoken, a faith that cannot be shown, an identity that cannot be revealed. She lives on the border between two worlds and belongs entirely to neither. The story of Queen Esther begins like this, in anonymity, in invisibility, and that's exactly where God most likes to work, because he doesn't choose the prepared, he prepares the chosen. But something was about to change. something she could never have imagined. Because when God decides to move, he doesn't ask permission, he simply acts. And the destiny of that anonymous young woman was about to collide with the most powerful throne in the world. It all began with the anger of a king. Queen Vashti was summoned to appear before the nobles during a banquet, but she refused. And in that empire, saying no to the king was tantamount to signing one's own death warrant. Vashti was deposed, and so the throne beside Ahasuerus remained empty. The king's advisors had an idea to gather the most beautiful young women from all over the empire. A silent competition. Whoever pleased the king would become the new queen. And Esther was one of them, not because I wanted to, but because she was taken. The biblical text is clear. Esther was also taken to the king's palace. It wasn't her choice, it was imposed. Mordecai instructed her, "Don't reveal your origin, don't say you're Jewish," and Esther obeyed. She entered the palace carrying a secret that could destroy her. She spent months preparing beauty treatments, perfumes, lessons on royal protocol, but none of that guaranteed safety. It only brought her closer to danger. When it was Esther's turn to appear before the king, something extraordinary happened. Ahasuerus was captivated by her in a way that no other young woman had ever been. He placed the royal crown upon her head, and Esther became queen of the most powerful empire in the world. But here's the truth that few realize. Esther and King Ahasuerus did not have an equal relationship. She was queen, yes, but she was also a prisoner. Because in the Persian Empire, not even the queen could enter the king's presence without being summoned. The punishment for that? Death, unless the king extended the golden scepter, and that depended entirely on his mood that day. So Esther was crowned, but she wasn't safe. She had a title, but no voice. She lived in the most luxurious palace in the world, but continued to hide who she really was. The crown didn't bring freedom, it only brought an illusion of protection. And that's where the story gets disturbing, because sometimes God puts us in positions that seem like a blessing, but are actually preparation for a battle. Esther didn't know this yet, but she would soon find out, because the real danger hadn't even begun. While Esther, she lived in the palace, trying to adapt to life as queen, but something dark was brewing. And it had a name, Haman. Haman was the second most powerful man in the empire. Promoted by King Ahasuerus to the highest position among all the nobles, he received an order. Everyone should bow down before him. Everyone, without exception. But Mordecai, Esther's cousin, refused, not out of pride, but out of faith, because as a Jew, he knew that extreme reverence was due only to God, and this enraged Haman irrationally. He didn't just want to punish Mordecai, he wanted to destroy the entire Jewish people. If you're enjoying this story, leave a like now and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos, because what comes next will give you chills. Haman devised a cold and calculating plan. He went to the king and said, "There is a people scattered throughout your empire who do not obey your laws. They are a threat. Allow them to be destroyed." And to make the proposal irresistible, Haman offered a huge sum of silver to the royal coffers. King Ahasuerus, without even asking which people they were, gave his signet ring to Haman. And with that ring, Haman signed an irreversible decree. On a specific day, all the Jews would be killed. Men, women, children. No one would be spared. The decree was sent to all 127 provinces of the empire. And here's the most terrifying detail. Haman and the plan against the Jews wasn't just political, it was spiritual. Because Haman was a descendant of Agag, king of the Amalekites, historical enemies of Israel. This wasn't just personal hatred, it was an ancient war trying to be completed. When the news reached the ears of the Jews, despair took hold. Mordecai tore his clothes, covered himself in ashes, and wept publicly. And inside the palace, protected by walls and luxuries, Esther still knew nothing. But she soon would, and she would have to choose between the throne and the people. Because now silence was no longer protection, it was complicity, and Esther's time had come. The news reached Esther through a servant. Mordecai was outside the palace, dressed in mourning clothes, crying out loudly. She was desperate and sent him new clothes. But Mordecai refused, and then he sent a message that would change everything. He told her about the decree, about the extermination plan, and he asked Esther to go to the king and intercede for the people. Esther replied fearfully, "Anyone who enters the king's presence without being summoned may be put to death unless he extends the golden scepter to them. And it has been 30 days since the king summoned me." 30 days. She was queen, but she was forgotten. And now she needed to risk her life to try to save a people the king didn't even know she belonged to, because Esther and the Jewish people were connected by a bond she still hid. It was then that Mordecai sent the most powerful message in all of history. Words that have transcended centuries and still resonate today. Do not think that because you are in the king's palace, you alone of the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? Read that last sentence again. Who knows if it wasn't for a moment like this? Esther wasn't in the palace by chance. It wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence, it was purpose. God placed her exactly where she needed to be, at the exact moment she was needed. But now she had to decide, use her position or protect her life. This courageous woman from the Bible faced the greatest dilemma anyone can encounter, and her response would define the fate of an entire nation. But before acting, she needed to prepare. Because courage without God is merely recklessness, and Esther knew this. She sent a reply to Mordecai, and that reply would change everything. Esther's response was direct and powerful. "Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days and 3 nights. I and my maids will do the same. After that I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. If I perish, I perish." Esther 4:16. If I have to die, I will die. This is not the speech of someone desperate. It is the speech of someone who understood the calling. Esther, courage, and faith met in that moment. She was not being irresponsible. She was being obedient, and there is a huge difference between the two. Esther could have remained silent. She could have continued to hide her identity. She could have thought, "I'm just one person. What can I do?" But she didn't, because she understood something profound. God doesn't need crowds to act. He needs availability. She decided to break the silence. But before speaking to the king, she spoke to God. Because faith that changes destinies doesn't begin with action, it begins with surrender. Esther didn't rush to the throne. She knelt first, and that made all the difference. The sacrifice for a nation began there, not in the palace, not before the king, but in Esther's room, where she decided that the lives of the people were worth more than her own. And that is what separates ordinary people from people used by God. It's not talent, it's not position, it's the willingness to say, "Here I am, use me." But now came the hardest part. 3 days of fasting, 3 days of spiritual preparation, 3 days for God to work behind the scenes while Esther prepared to enter the scene. And when those 3 days were over, there would be no turning back. There would only be faith or death. For 3 days and 3 nights, Esther and all the Jewish people fasted. They did not eat, they did not drink, they only cried out. Because fasting and intercession in the Bible always precede God's great moments. Fasting is not a way to manipulate God. It is a way to align the human heart with the divine will. It is saying, "I give up what naturally sustains me to depend only on you." And that is exactly what Esther did. While the empire continued its routine, while Haman plotted the final details, while the death decree drew near, an entire people was on their knees, and that changed everything. Because God's providence in Esther's story didn't begin when she entered the king's hall. It began when she bowed before the King of Kings. God works in silence, but he also works through intercession. And during those 3 days, something invisible was happening. God was preparing the king's heart. He was exposing Haman's plans. He was opening doors that seemed closed. All this while, Esther waited. And here is a powerful truth. Sometimes the greatest test of faith is not action. It is waiting for God's perfect timing. Esther could have rushed to the king immediately, but she chose to wait. She chose to fast. She chose to strengthen herself spiritually before facing the impossible. On the 3rd day, the fast ended, and Esther got up. She put on her royal robes. She looked at herself in the mirror, and she knew that this might be the last time, because now she was going to do what no one in the empire dared to do: enter the king's presence uninvited. Her heart pounded. Her hands trembled, but her faith was stronger than her fear, and she began to walk toward the throne room. Each step was a prayer, each breath a surrender, because she knew either God would sustain her or she would die trying to save her people. Esther walked through the palace corridors. Her royal dress trailed on the marble floor. The guards stared at her in surprise. She hadn't been summoned, and everyone knew what that meant. She reached the entrance to the throne room and stopped, took a deep breath, and then went in. King Ahasuerus sat on his throne, surrounded by advisors and nobles, and when he saw Esther standing there, unsummoned, silence fell over the hall. Everyone held their breath, because the protocol was clear: she was to die. But then, something extraordinary happened. The king extended his golden scepter. Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter, and the king asked, "What do you want, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even half the kingdom will be given to you." Even half the kingdom. But Esther didn't want half the kingdom. She wanted the life of a people, and she knew that this moment needed to be handled wisely. So she didn't reveal everything at once. She said, "If it pleases the king, come today with Haman to the banquet I have prepared." The king agreed, and that same day, Esther, the king, and Haman dined together. During the banquet, the king asked again, "What is your request, Esther?" And once again she waited. She said, "If the king finds favor in my eyes, come tomorrow, again with Haman, to another banquet, and then I will make my request." Haman left that banquet feeling like the most important man in the empire. He was the only nobleman invited to dine with the king and queen. But on his way home, he saw Mordecai, and all his pride turned to hatred. He arrived home and said to his wife, "None of this satisfies me as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate." Then his wife suggested, "Have a gallows built 25 meters high, and in the morning ask the king for permission to hang Mordecai on it." Haman loved the idea, and he ordered the gallows to be built immediately. He didn't know it, but he was building his own end. That night, the king couldn't sleep. And when a king can't sleep, he asks that the kingdom's historical records be read to him, and that's exactly what happened. While reading the records, they found something important. Years ago, Mordecai had denounced a plot to kill the king. He saved Ahasuerus' life, but he was never rewarded. The next morning, Haman went into the palace to ask the king for permission to hang Mordecai. But before he could speak, the king asked, "What should be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor?" Haman, thinking the king was speaking of him, suggested, "Dress him in royal robes, put him on the king's horse, and have one of the most important nobles lead him through the city proclaiming, 'This is what is done for the man whom the king wishes to honor.'" And the king replied, "Go quickly, take the robes and the horse, and do this to Mordecai the Jew." Haman was devastated, but he obeyed. He had to lead Mordecai through the city, proclaiming his honor. The humiliation was complete. That night, the second banquet took place. Esther, the king, and Haman were at the table, and the king asked for the 3rd time, "What is your request, Queen Esther? It shall be granted." And then Esther finally revealed it. If I have found favor in the eyes of the king, let my life be granted to me and the lives of my people, for we have been sold into slavery. If we had only been enslaved, I would have remained silent, but we have been condemned to death." The king was furious. "Who dared to do this?" And Esther answered, pointing to Haman, "The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman." The king left the hall, distraught. Haman, in despair, fell at Esther's feet, begging for mercy. But when the king returned and saw Haman lying on the couch where Esther was, he shouted, "He dares attack the queen in my own house." And one of the servants said, "Haman has built a gallows 25 meters high to hang Mordecai, the one who saved the king's life." The king ordered, "Hang him on it." And so Haman was executed on the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. God's providence was revealed in its absolute form. The enemy fell, and Queen Esther in the Bible showed that a single voice at the right moment can bring down empires of evil. But the story didn't end with Haman's death, because the decree against the Jews was still in effect. And according to the laws of the Persian Empire, not even the king could revoke a decree sealed with his ring. So Esther returned to the king, and this time she didn't have to risk her life. She had already won his favor. And the king authorized a new decree to be written. The Jews were allowed to defend themselves. And when the day appointed for destruction arrived, it wasn't the Jews who were destroyed. It was their enemies. The salvation of the Jewish people has come to pass. And it all began with a young woman who dared to break the silence. Now here's the most striking detail of this whole story. God's name doesn't appear even once in the book of Esther. Not once, not a single direct mention. But his presence is in every detail, in every twist and turn, in every impossible moment that became possible. God works in silence. He doesn't need the spotlight. He doesn't need credit. He works behind the scenes, moving hearts, opening doors, defeating enemies, saving nations. And often he uses unlikely people, ordinary people, people who feel unprepared, but who are available. Esther wasn't perfect. She was afraid. She hesitated. But when the moment came, she chose faith. And God used that choice to save an entire people. And here's what I promised at the beginning, the final revelation. Have you ever wondered why you are where you are? Why you went through what you went through? Why certain doors opened and others closed? Perhaps, just perhaps, you are being positioned for a specific moment. A moment when your voice will be needed. A moment when your silence will no longer be protection, but omission. A moment when God will say, "Now is the time." The biblical story of Esther isn't just about the past. It's about you, because each of us was placed somewhere at some time for a purpose. And perhaps today is the day for you to understand what yours is. Who knows if it wasn't for a time like this that you arrived at the position you are in? If this story touched you, I want to ask you 3 questions. Where are you now? What silence have you been keeping? And what is God asking you to do? Because, like Esther, you are not where you are by chance. Your life has purpose. Your voice has power. And perhaps the time to act is now. Write in the comments, "For a time like this," and tell me, what area of your life did this story impact? If you're not already subscribed, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Because every week we bring you exciting Bible stories that will strengthen your faith and transform your vision of purpose. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, because faith that changes destinies needs to be shared. And remember, God doesn't choose the prepared. He prepares the chosen. Just as he did with Esther, and just as he is doing with you, may the Lord bless you, and may you have the courage to say yes to the calling he has placed in your heart. See you in the next video.